Good morning, everyone. You're welcome to today's webinar on best practices on data protection in the hotel and hospitality industry. Thank you for taking our time to be available to join this session. You can see our attendees already. Thank you for joining in. So I just want to start by giving a brief introduction of our law firm, Jackson Etienne Edu. So you can see our profile is scrolling on the screen right now. So we're a full service law firm with a sector focus. And we are also a licensed data protection compliance organization. And as a full service law firm, what we mean is that we provide legal services across all needs, ranging from corporate and commercial, intellectual property, regulatory and compliance, commercial intellectual property, litigation and dispute resolution, which includes ADR, arbitration, mediation, and the rest, real estate and regulatory and compliance, to mention a few. So we're a one-stop shop for all legal needs. And particularly today, we're acting in our role as data protection compliance organizations. This means that we are licensed by the regulator, the Nigerian Data Protection Bureau, to provide data protection compliance services. This includes trainings, conducting of audits and assessments of data protection activities of organizations, provision of data protection documents such as policy drafting, contracts, and all such related matters, also conducting of impact assessments as well. So I'll just go into introduction. I'll introduce myself and I'll allow my colleague, who's also going to be part of the webinar, taking the webinar, to introduce himself. My name is Kodi Chima Anibogo. I am an associate in the Intellectual Property and Data Protection Unit of the firm, Jackson Etienne Edu. I'm also a certified information privacy professional. That means I'm licensed by, I'm registered with the International Association of Privacy Professionals. Let Ifeanyi introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ifeanyi Okonkwo. I'm a senior associate here at Jackson Etienne Edu, and I also deputize the head of department for the data protection team at Jackson Etienne Edu.
Thank you, Ifeanyi. So just speaking a bit on how the webinar came about. Data Protection and Data Privacy Week was celebrated last week. Data Privacy Day was celebrated last week as well, the Global Data Privacy Day. And for the regulator in Nigeria, the Data Privacy Week covered a series of various activities. And in our own capacity as a DPCO, licensed DPCO, we felt that, it would be good for us to also reach out, to the public and provide, some of our expertise in guidance in terms of data protection. And we looked across the industries and felt, where would this need be most required? And we landed on the hospitality industry for very clear reasons. The hospitality industry is a key data user in terms of its direct relation with customers and with guests. So there's a lot of that direct link. And we even saw some, interesting statistics in terms of how much guest data come in. For instance, hotels in Nigeria, there are about 7 to 10 million guests per year this year, and there's even a projection that it will get up to 17.5 million in the year 2027. So understandably, the hotel sector deals with a lot of personal information. And we're going to really be focusing on that in this webinar, in the little time that we have. We'll be talking about the overview on the existing regulation, the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation, the things that hotels should take note of, and best practices in terms of dealing with personal information. So like I said, the hospitality industry is hugely data-driven. There's a lot of information, there's a lot of personal information that goes around in relation to providing your services to your guests, and also to ensure that you are able to enhance enhance your service provision, enhance the business you offer. You have to build and nurture relationships. So of course, there's so much flow of data, so much collection of data and information. But as much as that data is necessary, there's also the part of responsibility to ensuring that that data is kept secure and the privacy rights of the data subject of that your guests, as a hotel is being ensured. So it's necessary to have this awareness for the hospitality industry. You can see on the slide, NIBS has reported that where 21 fraudsters, attempted 46, where there were 46,000, about 46,000 attacks, right, by fraudsters, they were successful with 41%, which just shows that 91% of the time, fraudsters are actually able to hack into, systems and get information. So it shows that there is a lot that needs to be done in terms of ensuring security of information that organizations hold, and in terms of protecting the rights of data subjects or of your guests as hotels. And the assumption that it is only financial institutions and only banks, that are being attacked by hackers is not accurate, as a lot of people do assume, because the hospitality industry is actually the third reported most hacked industry. And there are popular data breach incidents such as the Marriott's, the Ritz in London, and the MGM resorts. So based on the relationship which hotels have in terms of direct relation to their customers, there is that direct housing and holding of personal information, which is information that would identify an individual by these hotels. For the obvious reason of course, people have to check in, people have to make reservations, people have to, you need to be able to verify the individuals that you are providing your services to. But that has also led to having such a large volume of data. For instance, if it was an FMCG company, they don't necessarily have to interact with their end consumers. You're just buying their product and you're going, they might relate with their distributors, but for a hotel in that service industry, you're dealing directly. So there's a lot more that comes in. And the need for this awareness of data protection obligations as a hotel, as an organization, is because there are actually regulatory obligations stipulated under the law. And I'll speak soon go deeper into the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation. So these laws are also applicable, especially to the hospitality industry and every organization that processes data. There's also the effect and the influence of your brand value and reputation, where you are dealing with information properly. So customers and guests are more likely to go to hotels that they know that are safe, that guarantee the safety of their data, that they would not have there won't be unauthorized access to their personal information. And of course, where there has been a breach, where there has been fraudsters or there's been an attack, is definitely going to affect that reputation and that value. And these hotels have branches, across Nigeria. So once something happens somewhere, it spreads and then your customer base is affected. And we definitely don't want that for your business. Also, being data protection aware enables you in the proper vendor selection, because we understand that in the course of payments and transactions in booking hotels, there are lots of third-party involvement. Even the hotel property management software that is used, they are third-party provided, but you need to be sure that you're putting the data of your guests in the right hands through, ensuring that with your own knowledge of data protection and the knowledge of the staff in the hotel, you're able to better select the best vendor that would guarantee, data protection rights. So while you may be looking out in a tech company for, speed, if there's a downtime, how long would they resolve an issue? You also need to be looking at how would they ensure that every information they are giving is secure and that privacy rights can be enforced seamlessly. So I'll dive in now. There are several laws that govern privacy rights. That includes the Constitution, which guarantees every individual a right to private life. And there's the NDPR, that's the Nigeria Data Protection Regulation. This was issued in January 2019, right? And the objective of the NDPR, I know we are also aware of the EU General Data Protection Regulation, is to safeguard the rights of individuals. They looked at it, the sense of the digitization and the system the way things are, a lot of things are online. There's a lot of seamless access to information. There's a lot of integration with the cloud and use of other technologies that puts data in a more accessible atmosphere than before. For instance, in previous times, you would have to get physical files, people would have to sign in and you'd keep those maybe in a cabinet and the likes, but everything is now online and seamless and is being stored somewhere. So once there is access, to it, it's not a contained risk. So that was what the data protection regulation looked at, to ensure that organizations, hotels that deal with the data, ensure that they have the proper compliance mechanisms in place, right? There's also the reciprocity angle in terms of the GDPR does exist, and then they have those laws in place that govern citizens from the EU and Europe, and there is a need to ensure that that is also covered for Nigerian citizens, because when you look at it in the sense now that the EU GDPR is protecting residents, and of course for Nigerian hotels, we have a lot of, you're dealing with citizens from different parts of the world. So you actually do need to be conversant and, ensure that protection in line with global best practices, which is why we're also, doing what we're doing today. Because you are not just dealing with data of Nigerians and that Nigerian law, but there is an extension where they are citizens of other countries and their laws may extend to their own data, which is what the EU GDPR does. So the NDPR also in a sense, protects Nigerian citizens in themselves as other laws are protecting citizens of other areas. And to state, this Nigeria Data Protection Regulation does not cover corporate data. Corporate data in the sense now where you are dealing with your vendors and their companies and organizations, their names, their addresses is of no concern to this law. The law is focused on individuals, persons that can be identified. So if you are dealing with a service provider, your representative, the contact person in that service provider, that information is what the law is concerned with. So the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation provides obligations that users and handlers of data have to ensure that they comply with before they can handle data in any manner. And I'll just run us through certain terminologies that are very key in data protection. First of all, there's the data controller. This is a person who acts alone or jointly with another person, for instance, your hotel now, to determine how data should be collected. To give a quick instance, where you are collecting information, someone is booking a reservation, you're asking for their name, their email, sometimes passport number, and things like that. You are determining, because to provide the service, to make your hotel room available, you need this information, you're determining it. But the next one here is data administrator or processor. That's the person that, based on your instruction, will act. So where you have a third party, a management software or a vendor that then processes that data in terms of using this information I've provided to you, provide this service or help us to, fulfill this obligation to the client. They're acting on your behalf. The service provider is acting because you, the hotel, you have requested this. So they are the processor, while you are the controller. You have complete control on what is done with that personal data. Like I've been talking about, the data subject, that is your guests, your visitors. This can also be your employee. A data subject is basically anybody who that data is about. Any natural person who can be identified through any of the factors who that data is about. And personal data is any information relating to an identifiable person. So this can be an email address, it can be a phone number, it can be an ID number, it can be, the name as well. It can be an image, just any information that one can use to identify a person. So whatever information you're using to identify your guests is in itself personal data. Processing is anything that is done to personal data. So where you are collecting the data, you're storing it in your database, you're transferring it to your service provider, maybe you outsource some of your services in terms of cleaning and you need some information and things along that line, or even when you have third-party booking platforms as well, through which they get data for you, is because you have processed and authorized them to collect that information on your behalf. So any of such, even the deletion, is also a processing. So basically any action done to personal data. And then we also have here sensitive personal data. This is because there is some data that the law particularly guards and regards as highly sensitive and they should be treated with a higher duty of care than even ordinary personal data would be. This ranges from race, ethnicity, health, sexual orientation, and we understand that in some instances, but hotels will need to have health information where there is where there is maybe a sick guest, and you do need to relate with the hospital. So many scenarios where that can be relevant. So in those instances, there's more special care required. I'll also go into the principles, data protection principles applicable to the hospitality industry. So what the law has said is, the law has said that in dealing with this information, personal information, which can be identified, there are several things you must comply with. There are several principles you must comply with. The first one, lawfulness and transparency, speaks to your handling of the information. Typically, we would understand that as a hotel, you would be providing a service. So there's an engagement. Pardon me, let me clear my throat. So there's an engagement relationship that would require you to provide the service, to deal with that information. And that, that is a basis to process and to do any action to that data. There are also instances where people would reach out and prospect for customers, oh, come and stay in our hotel, be our guest and things like that. So those things data can only be used or processed within certain parameters, which the law has provided. I can see a hand up. Please, we would want to take questions after, just so that we are able to better conserve time. So please, if you could note them down, if there's a chat option, kindly put it in the chat. Thank you. So transparency speaks to your use of personal data. As a hotelier, what are you going to be doing with that information? There is need to share that knowledge and your intention with the owner of the data. Please bear in mind that the hotel, as you collect information, you're not the owner of the data. The owner of the data is that data subject, your guests, your visitors staying in your hotel that provided it with you. So that's the same way you should regard that information. You're not able to do anything with it, which is really what data protection is about. So in transparency, you make your intention in respect of the data known. And Ifeanyi is going to speak more about, best practices, how you can ensure you are dealing transparently with personal data. This is ranging from ensuring you have privacy policies in place and the likes. Another principle here is purpose limitation. And this means that where you have collected data, for instance, to provide a service, to reserve the room and make the room available, and to ensure that your guests gets their hotel room and gets their accommodation and everything is proper, you cannot use it for another purpose. So where you are sending it for marketing communication is an entirely different thing. If the purpose you've collected it to is to provide the service, that is what that data should be used for. And this purpose should also be part of that transparency principle of making it known what you intend to do with it to your guests. There's also the principle of data minimization. This is basically, you should not collect more information than you need. Some hotels may collect next of kin data. It has to be clear that you need this information, because in the event where you collect more information than you need and there is, God forbid, a data breach, then more access, the hackers and these unauthorized personnel get more access to information than they need to have. So you always have to be able to ask yourself, at every point, that are we collecting what we need to use and not more just for the sake of having excess data? That can be detrimental to the business. The next purpose is storage limitation. So you are not expected to hold on to data forever. As we've established, it's not your data. And you also have to make sure that the purpose, you're holding on to data for as long as necessary. If the purpose is fulfilled, you have to think about it. Do you need to hold on much longer? Of course, there's the principle of data security. I already talked about the breaches, data breaches and things that, unauthorized access. So the law requires you to put in measures to secure data you hold. And the law has actually left that up to you. So there's an industry standard in terms of, for hotels, because we also have access to financial information, we have access to these informations that can be used, against persons. There is a need to use this sort of security system, have this sort of IT system in place, have this sort of firewalls. So the law expects you, knowing your organization, knowing your industry, to go and make those appropriate judgment calls in terms of what kind of technical measures and security measures should be in place. And where this is not done, it is usually very detrimental. To give an instance, British Airways, there was an instance where there was a data breach where hackers had access to all their customers' data. And the hackers had basically created a phishing account, a phishing fake website that mirrored British Airways, and people were just imputing their information and things like that. And even when they got into the system, they were able to easily get information that should have been kept encrypted and things like that. So by the time the British Airways was fined, the issue now became the breach was so much due to these are ordinary measures that should have been put in place, because you have this sort of information, you have this financial information, you should encrypt them. And if you're encrypting them, you keep the keys safe, or you should pseudonymize them or do whatever needs to be done, but keep it safe. So where there is an unlikely, there is a breach, and the regulators come in and look and see that you didn't even take, the necessary care, the due care, given the industry you play in, that's when there'll be a lot to pay. The next principle is accuracy. So where you are dealing with personal data, you are actually required to keep that information accurate. And in that sense, hotels should be able to provide mechanisms through which guests can make corrections to the data you hold. If there's a type of error in the guest's name, or if there's a change in the phone number and things like that, how else can they contact you? Have you made it clear that you should call our number or send an email to this, or reach out to our DPO and things along that line? So that speaks to that principle of accuracy. The next point is accountability. So everyone entrusted with data, you as a data controller, the hotel, your service providers that you share data with in order to enable you provide the service, also need to be keeping data accountable. And the regulator even comes in this end, Nigerian regulation, because you're also required to conduct an audit each year, and file where you're processing a certain amount of data and file it with the regulator. And that also leads to that principle of accountability. I also want to speak on the rights of guests and rights of the data subject, because they are tied in. So like we've established these principles that the law provides and the requirements and obligations that follow from it. There are also rights that the law provides. The Constitution allows for the right to private life, but then this law has expanded it further and created other rights for your guests, which you as a hotel need to ensure that you adhere to. So there's a right to be informed of the data processing. This ties to that transparency principle. You need to let your guests know, this is why we're using your information. This is why we're collecting this information. This is, if we're sharing it, this is what will happen. There's a right to be forgotten. So as your guest, if I'm no longer interested in receiving communication from you in relation to my booking and things along that line, I am able to request that. And as the hotel, you should be able to grant that request. You can also restrict your processing. The guest can also request for a copy of the personal data. They can ask to make corrections. We already established the principle of data accuracy, and they can object and make complaints. So all these tie in with the principles and tie into expectations from organizations, hotels such as yourself, that handle personal data. And the importance in this, especially for Nigeria, bringing it home, is that there are sanctions where as hotels we fail to comply, and we really need to bring that, because that's very important. There's been a couple of cases in Nigeria where organizations have already had to pay and have been fined, and I know Ifeanyi will speak more on that. So what the law provides is that where there is a breach of privacy rights, the sanction and the penalty, the financial penalty, relates to the number of data subjects you deal with. So if you're dealing with over 10,000 data subjects, that is 10,000 guests. And let me reemphasize, we're focusing on guests and visitors because we know that that's where the hotel industry is faced. But this also includes your employees, right? This also includes your service providers, individual service providers and their representatives. So you can be fined up to 2% of your annual revenue, or 10 million naira. You can be fined up to 2% of your annual revenue, or 10 million naira, whichever is greater. And where you are dealing with less data subjects, less than 10,000, you can be fined up to 2 million naira, right? Or 1% of your annual revenue. So it's something that is very, very important to take note of. And beyond that breach of privacy rights, the law in itself already provides that this regulation, where you do not comply with it, all sanctions that follow non-compliance with the act of the establishing body would be applicable. And I can mention that these sanctions include, I think, a penalty payment of 500,000 and the option of prison. There's an imprisonment option for officers of the hotel. So this is something to actually take note of because the regulator is very active. Okay, so I'll hand over to Ifeanyi to take over from here.
Thank you very much, Kodichi, for that wonderful overview. Maybe before we go into, I don't know if we should take those questions outstanding before we go into the. Yeah, so I think we should take those questions for those whose hands were raised before now, and then maybe in the course of the best practices, we can also talk about those questions and see what answers we can provide to them. So those persons whose hands were raised before, you can raise your hand and we can take your questions in the interim. Also, you can use the Q&A box to drop questions there. Or if you have questions, if you cannot access the Q&A box, you can also drop them in the chat box and we will get to them. Okay, so I'll just begin. If you can share the slide, thank you. Okay. So we'll be talking about best practices in the hospitality space. But before that, it's important to talk about some privacy and data protection concerns in the hospitality industry. Now, we know the problems that surfaces in the hospitality industry. One of the major problems usually is the lack of data privacy training for employees. Now, most hotels we've been at would usually, from our discussions starting from the receptionist, we'll find that they do not even know about data privacy. And yes, there are still some other laws like the Lagos State laws regulating hotels that tells certain things that they should do regarding the protection of guests in the hotel. But beyond that, there are some rights which Kodichi has stated that are very key or paramount for every staff of an hotel should know. But what we have today is that most are not trained yet, and there is that regulatory requirement that every year that training should be conducted for staff in the hospitality space as well. Then another issue we've identified is the insecure guest Wi-Fi networks. So it's not just enough to go get a network brand and then distribute free Wi-Fi for guests in the hotel. There are some level of protection that must be considered before doing that. And this is for the IT teams in the hotels. They need to tailor the protection of all the various mechanisms used to protect, to distribute that Wi-Fi network, to make sure that it is in accordance with the ISO standard. The present standard in use is 27002, although 27001 is also in order. And these are some of the things that are left undone. Now, there's also the problem of staff migration and training gap. From year to year, we know people leave the hotels and the new people come in, and sadly, the training gap is there because maybe who has been trained, if a receptionist has been trained in 2022 and in 2023 that receptionist has gone, quickly you want to get someone to fill in the space, and perhaps there's no training for that person, and maybe it runs through the entire 2023, but something can happen, anything can happen within few minutes, within a day. And that is why continuous orientation is very important. Now, there's also insider threats from staff. Reports on, we've had reports of staff who go outside and divulge information concerning their guests that are lodged in the hotels. And this continues over and over. And sometimes certain persons are usually very, very careful the kind of hotel they go to, because there have been instances of leaked information in some of the hotels. You also have complex ownership structures. There are some hotels that have various sub hotels, as well as even restaurants and lounge and all that, and it makes it then very difficult to understand the ownership structure as well as what applicable data protection rules should be followed for each. So there's a need. It's not bad getting a lot of structures under a particular company, but as much as you create a new structure, there also needs to be the legal structure that should follow the new creation. And then we also have data breaches from insecure payment processor systems. We've had instances of leaked financial details from guests who try to pay through either your payment gateways or even online transfers, or even online transfers from the website. So if your website is designed in such a way that guests can actually pay through your website, then you want to make sure that the payment gateway and the third-party vendors that provide that services are actually compliant with data protection and have a secure payment gateway system. Otherwise, the implications can be quite terrible. And then a lot of data transmissions in the hospitality space are unencrypted. And this is that because the NDPR, that's the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation Committee talked about, provides that these data should be encrypted as much as possible. And then we also have external threat from regulators. I think it was Celia that was reported not so long ago, how the EFCC came into the hotel, joined staff and forced them to get the access cards to guest private rooms. And then they went into those rooms, forcefully entered those rooms, and then started arresting various guests in the hotel. And the question is that within the law? So normally if they are going to do that, there would normally be some sort of fiat saying that, okay, you can go and do this. So hotel owners should also be familiar with what is allowed and what is not allowed. And when the regulators breach those privacy, it's not inappropriate for the hoteliers to meet with the privacy with the guests and then secure the privacy rights if such breach occurs. Then there have been instances really where data protection non-compliance led to serious problem for those in the hospitality space. For instance, the Airbnb was found guilty for breaching Russian legislation on data storage and was fined 2 million rubles. We also have the ICO, that's this one happened in the UK. They fined Marriott hotels about 18.4 for a major data breach that happened in 2014, but it was eventually discovered in 2018. You know? So the question is, during the gap between 2014 to 2018, what happened? They didn't do what they were supposed to do in regards to the data breach. And you also have recently in Nigeria certain electronic payment gateways being championed by third parties, like some companies were eventually triggered. They was hacked, and then the Nigerian Data Protection Bureau, or rather NIDA before the Bureau, had to go after them. So we have instances of this happening every day, and every day on the street we hear stories also of certain persons being murdered or killed in the hotel, maybe because of their information were leaked. Also, you have instances where the hotels have been able to save or protect or lead to the prosecution of certain crimes because of the help of the CCTV cameras. We come into all this in order to look. So what then is the best practice for those in the hospitality industry? And forgive us that we are mentioning more of hotels, because the hospitality industry is very wide, and we need most of our examples is really actually focused on hotels. Now, you have the various things one is supposed to do. I like to take them practically. So this is what happens. First, you have from the entrance to whatever happens within the hotel, and afterwards when the guest leaves the hotel, there are various regulatory checks that comes to play. For instance, you have CCTV camera from the entrance. Most hotels do have that from the entrance where people walk into the hotel. At that time, immediately the CCTV camera begins to capture images of the person, right? And no communication has been stated to say there is CCTV camera or this premises has CCTV cameras in there, inbuilt. So there needs to be that kind of notice, even from the get-go. So there needs to be that kind of notice right there from the get-go. Otherwise, you have already started mining data without the proper notice. Then also you have virtual booking via online app or call. So when you have this virtual booking online, what happens is persons are saying, oh, I want to check in for 6 p.m. to 12 p.m. next day, and then the form usually would ask for their name, their phone numbers, and all that. Now, if you have, the best practice is that at that particular time, once the guest is imputing those information, you are collecting data. You are collecting personal data. At that time, there should be a notice stating to that the guest that, oh, we will be collecting your personal data for purposes of blah, 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 blah. And this is a requirement also of for hotels under the regulations. So that notice needs to be there. They need to be aware that you are taking this data from them. Either it's done through the app, through the website, or even through normal call, where you see some persons book via call. So the receptionist needs to be informed that this should form part of their discussion. When they pick the calls, they say, you want to book, okay, and please take note, I'm taking note of your details for the purposes of, booking, and based on the regulation, they'll say, oh, fine. And so you know that you have that consent, you have done the needful under the law. Then the payment service gateway, like I said earlier, and the print of receipt and the keeping of receipt. Some hotels will usually, after payment from the guest, you then keep the receipt, you print out the receipt and you keep. But most times you find out that that receipt, if it's not kept safely, certain persons could have access to it. And certain persons could use the information on the receipt to further any, illegal act, like trying to hack the person's account and all that. So all this needs to be, others need to be conscious of this. These are things that needs to be done. Then celebrities, it is known practice that sometimes when celebrities enter an hotel, they book with false name. Now, when they do this, two things happens. Under the NDPR, there is inaccurate information. So there's the integrity of that data is in question, right? So that is not really allowed. And also, under the Hotel Proprietors Law of Lagos State, for instance, you find out that one of those key requirements would be for you to collect that data of the persons who lodge. So if false names are used, then the integrity of that data is put to question, plus the fact that you are now going against the regulatory compliance. But what can be done really in such instance is the celebrity can share their ID, and you can have that under a special place where you store this ID information, and then maybe you can then, if you go ahead and put the first name on the general registrar or the registrar list, then that's fine. So far, you have the accurate information, and it has become the practice of that hotel in order to protect celebrities. So that is actually in furtherance of their own protection and the protection of their personal data as well. Of course, it would be disastrous if everybody coming to the hotel, for instance, after Davido, I then come to the hotel and I see Davido's name, I see his phone number, immediately I will collect it, and you would have breached, the privacy rights of that celebrity. Now, what about cameras in the room? And the question is it okay for hotels to put cameras, especially hidden cameras, even if it's not hidden, in the room where guests lodge? There have been serious arguments for both sides. Some say that, well, going by the fact that in recent time we've been witnessing a lot of illegal things happening in the hotel, that it makes a lot of sense to have the cameras in the room, so that in case if somebody is killing someone, the camera will picture everything, and it's easy for the prosecutors to prove whether there is malicious or whether the intent is there, or whether it was an accidental occurrence. So, Beth, the truth is, and the fact remains, that camera in a room goes against the privacy of the data subject. So, no matter how good it is that should be there, it is too sensitive for cameras to be in a room where the guest is lodging, meaning you are watching them sleep, you're watching them talk, you're hearing their conversations, for those ones that pick sounds, and then perhaps even if it is in the bedroom, you're also watching them. It is just too terrible. Although there is also an argument that one of the exceptions, to this is when the collection of that data is needed for the person's own protection. And the question will now be, at what point in time does protection come to play? Is it when he's alone in the room, or is it because there is someone who came to visit, or the person had entered the hotel with someone? So that is it. But the best practice usually would be not to have the camera in the room, but the camera should be from the passage. So when the person, whoever goes in, whoever comes out, that is standard practice. Then we have issue of privacy respect from staff. Most hoteliers may not know, but the truth is a lot of staff in the hotel are leaking information of their guests. In fact, it is so bad that someone can just walk onto an hotel and ask the reception, please, the person that just walked in here, the person lodged here, what room? You know, all those divulging of information, perhaps it's done without knowledge of what the law says. But this is the more reason why training for staff is important every year to year. And this is why it is also good that during the course of the training, all staff, especially the receptionists, in fact, all staff, including the laundry staff and the rest of them, should all partake in that training. Then you also have the issue of regulators' raid, which I mentioned before. So the truth is this: does EFCC, for instance, have the right to come to barge into an hotel, force the staff and receptionists to get the access key and enter into a room and drag people out of the room? And even accuse the hotel, of course, of housing a lot of illegal activities, Yahoo and all that. Does EFCC have that power to so do? These are part of the issues or the training that would ordinarily, an advisory that an hotel should usually have when they engage a TPCO or an external lawyer. So they would usually advise at what time, because EFCC has a lot of rights and power under the law, but there are some powers that they do not have. So you would be able to know at what time, why are they coming in, what is the reason stated. Then you know, you call your PBCs to advise, do they have the right to so do, before you give in. So it depends on the situation and circumstance of the raid. But most times, if they are to do this, they will usually come with a fiat. Then we have images on Google Maps. It has been known that certain times hotels will just go on Google Maps, see the images that were created or taken by staff, by guests, and then use them in their promotion activities. Is this right? Is this proper? So we need to know that, first of all, two things come to play. There's the issue of privacy, which is debatable, and then there is the issue of copyright and also image rights. So you have the persons who take pictures normally, who took the picture, has the copyright in that image, right? So when you go using that to promote your business or then what you are doing is that you are infringing on that copyright, especially when you do that without consent. It is immaterial that the person posted it. The person posted it for themselves, so that you have now used it to further the promotion of your business, then makes you an infringer to that right. That's on the one side. The other side is the fact that the person may not actually wish that their image should be used as a promotion of a certain hotel. Who knows? Maybe the person even gave the hotel, maybe the person took their image and gave the hotel a 1 or 2 star review. And then this hotel takes that image and begins to use it as a promotional activity to show that they are the best hotel. So it may not be the right thing to do. The best practice is usually to write to the person. Google Map has made it possible for you to actually try to reach out to the person. So you reach out to the person and say, oh, can we use this image for our promotional activities? Then there is also duty to that privacy after the guest leaves the hotel. And that duty to privacy continues, until when that data should be destroyed. Now, we notice that most hotels do not have a retention policy. They keep this data and keep it in perpetuity. Should it be so? That is the problem. So usually there are laws around this. The laws regulating hotels usually would stipulate, depending on the kind of personnel, how long you should, some are silent anyway, on how long you should protect or keep the data of the information. But the most important thing is no data should have to stay with you. No personal data should have to stay with you in perpetuity. So there should be a period, the standard period usually for some, depending on, especially for contractual matters, could be for 6 years, after which you then destroy the data. But if there are some other laws, there are various laws really. It should be some financial, it depends on the circumstance. If it's financial, if it is a crime and all that, there are stipulations as to how long you can hold this data for. So these are also part of the things you would need your advisory, you need your DPCO's advice for. And having said that, so in a nutshell, we can just list and say you need to implement data security measures. Your DPCOs can help you do this. You need to have the capacity building for staff, training of staff year to year. DPCOs can help you do this. Then the controllers must put mechanisms in place to prevent data breaches, whether physical or network breaches. And then you have controllers must also have and follow a documented data breach policy. This data breach policy is very essential. It is mandatory under the data protection regulation. And your DPCOs can help you draft one. It is wrong to just go online, take any data breach policy and put. So we've had instances of certain persons doing that, and then when there's a data breach, the data subject then relies on it, and then we're like, oh, did we do that to ourselves? So that's why it's very important to engage DPCOs to help you look at your business model. What does the company do? What doesn't it do? And all these things will be tailored under your data breach policy. Then you need to also have data processing agreements with third-party service providers. Every third party, either a recruitment agency, or if you have an external IT team or a web designer, there should always be a third-party service agreement which will, have the stipulations on data privacy embedded in them. Then increase transparency around the collection and use of consumer data to foster customer trust. Develop organization policies for handling personal data, encryption of cards and other forms of collection. Data notice should be on them as well. Data collection technology for methods that could display a privacy policy on every medium of where data is being collected. And then the most important thing is that the NDPR provides two things, which I want us to take home today. There is the requirement to actually engage a DPCO to help you do what we call a data compliance assessment. In the course of doing that, if there are loopholes, you can always engage with your DPCOs to do a remediation service. And most importantly, that compliance assessment is done, and then a statutory report is filed to the authority. That is what makes you compliant as an organization. The NDPP would usually at the end of the year bring out the list of all compliant companies in every industry. So they will come to the hospitality industry as well and put all those that are compliant. It is sad to note that majority of hotels, especially even in Nigeria, are yet to be compliant. But we have seen about close to 30% compliance from some other hotels. And the beautiful thing about it is when you are compliant and there is a mark that is given that you can actually put on your website and even on the reception, the entrance, showing that every data that the data subject lives with you, your guest lives with you, is protected because you are compliant with the NDPR. Now that gives assurance to the data subject. So when you're asking guests, please, sir, your ID, they will cheerfully give it because they see that you have the data compliance mark from the NDPB. So this is why that is also, it helps the company and it's good for branding. And then secondly, where there has been a breach, in case the hotel has recorded any breach, either in your system glitch, employees' emails and all that, or guest emails and data that you have on your database, there is an implementation framework states that you should report that breach within 72 hours. In case you have this problem, you can always talk with your DPCOs who will advise you how best to go about it. So these are the best practices in that area, and it is always important that we keep to it, and this is how we can abide by the provisions of the NDPR. So we are going to take questions now. I see there have been some questions, and I and Kodichi will do well to answer all your questions.
Yes, I think Agnes's hand is already up. So let's see.
It would be nice to also hear their voice, so if you can unmute her.
Yes, exactly. Agnes, you should be able to speak now. Hello, Agnes, are you there? Okay. While we wait for her to come up, it says that she's muted. Agnes, you're muted. In case you're not aware, we can take the questions in the Q&A portion. Thank you. Daniel Oguni asked 2 questions. The first asked on data minimization. Daniel, if you want to speak, please, that's fine as well. Okay, I can see Esther. So, okay, Esther, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much for this session. I really gained a lot. Okay, and I want to ask a question regarding, it's not specific to hospitality now. So I would like to know, in the event somebody takes my picture, probably thinks I'm doing something funny in public, then takes my picture or my video and uploads it online, you see blogs jumping on it, everybody's sharing my pictures. Is there something I can do to fight them? Is there a protection for me in that regard? Hello, did you get my question?
Yes, Esther, I sorry, I was muted.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, so yes, so even though you did not take that picture yourself, maybe someone else took that picture, that person might have what we call a copyright in that picture, in just that photograph they take. But you have privacy rights in relation to your image. Your image is yours, and what it should be done with or how it should be used, you also have a say in that. And there are 2 major laws that gives you that right. First is the Constitution, which protects the right of privacy, and the Constitution is the ground norm above every other laws. And the second one is you also have the right under the NDPR, that's the Nigerian Data Protection Regulation, because personal data can also mean your image, right? Then this has also happened recently. You recall at the last election, I think there was a market woman that PDP, that's Atiku, and the then Senate Speaker, Saraki, they were sued because they used a picture. I think their photographer actually did that when they went for a rally. They then used a picture where she was, happy and, hailing them. They used that picture and then used to do promotion for PDP. It was on the billboards. And eventually she sued through her lawyers. and eventually the court awarded her, I think, about 5 million or 10 million naira based on that. So yes, you do have a right. I hope that answers your question, Esther.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, let me take Daniel's questions. He had first asked about data minimization. Are there rules or regulations guiding the data required for each industry? So for speaking to the NDPR particularly now, it does not provide specifics because, like we've established, the organizations or industries are different. So there may be a requirement, like you've mentioned now, if I reference the law relating to hotels for Lagos and also, the federal law along that line. So there may be requirements where they stipulate to keep these exact numbers, the details, even for security. So even in terms of compliance with legal obligations, there may be some information that you are actually required to keep. So that sense now, you do have an explanation for your holding onto that personal data where that happens, right? But in relation to the data protection law itself, it does not specify any rule guiding data minimization apart from the fact that you should only hold that which you need. And like we've had experiences, we've been DPCOs for over 3 years now. Now we've had to audit organizations. So we've had instances where we've seen where people are actually holding more data than they need to hold. And there's actually risk to that. Even the hotels we've audited, where we've observed that you're holding onto this data and you ask why, and there's just the off chance that you may need to contact someone or something. And like, where is the possibility that this will happen? In the event of a data breach, that means that the impact, like we talked about the number of even data subjects and the likes. So you've increased your number of data that you hold just by having that, and it's not relevant to your business. It does not improve or, even increase the business base in any way. So those kind of considerations have to be made. I'm sure that there are specifics to each industry. If I actually referenced that the kind of data that you should hold, but it will depend per industry. However, the organization itself, as a hotel, you should know why you're holding on to that information. If you need to hold on to more information than you have, and immediately delete once you are clear that you no longer need this information. There's even some information you can hold that at the end of the day, you can always request it. You can request it from the guests when it becomes up, rather than holding on to it on the off chance. In the event you do need this, why not contact the guest and request for this information than having it in your database, which may be prone to attacks. Daniel had also had another question. He had asked for time limit for data storage and whether the purpose for which the data is required be communicated to the person releasing it. Yes, exactly. So we had referenced in the principles of data protection, and under the data protection law, you should only hold data for a certain time as long as it's necessary. If you are holding on to data forever, which is unlikely and is not in line with best practice, like Ifeanyi has identified, you need to document your reasons and your rationale for holding on to that data. But as we established, for contracts, it's 6 years before the statute of limitations takes over. So you're not able to work with that information in that sense any longer. So at that point, you no longer need to store it. And it all depends. And that's why we talk about, engaging in DPCO, which is what we are, because drafting those policies, having that guidance in terms of, am I holding it on for too long? Should I stop? Because in the event of any non-compliance, right, these things will be looked at. And the regulator will go through your records, go through what kind of information you have in place. Okay, you held on to this data. Why do you even have this at that point? You need to be able to give clear reasons for holding on to such data. And yes, you must communicate the purpose for holding data to your to the data subjects, because that's something we actually observed. So in a couple of hotels, we've noticed that their privacy policies were easily accessible. Maybe you could scan a code on the reception desk, very commendable, very compliant with law. But some people don't even have those policies on their websites, and you're not pointing your guests to that policy. So that is not compliant with the law in that sense. So in any event where you are handling personal data, you are actually required to communicate it. And of course, drafting the privacy policy is also something that's important. I think if I touched on that, don't lift the policy from anywhere. So you go and you go and pick one famous hotel and you now put the policy on your website. No, you need to work with an expert on data protection in terms of ensuring that your policy is in line so that you're not tying yourself to things that you cannot even provide, because it would be, Out to you. So, okay, there was another question on the group from William Dozier, but please, Agnes, if you are able to speak, I can see Owoyemi. Okay, let me allow Owoyemi talk if I take the next one on the group. Please feel free. Yes, you should be able to unmute now, Owoyemi.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks for the lecture.
Yeah.
Thanks for the message. Good afternoon. Yeah, my name is Owoyemi. I have only one question. In a situation whereby the police came in to the receptionist and asked the receptionist that there's a guest that enter now, they notice that a guest enter. Is he, what in that case, what should person do? To disclose the guest information, to tell them that, no, I don't know what you are talking about. You know how Nigerian police are. They escalate, they start shouting, okay, we have to arrest the manager, we have to do this, we have to do that. So in that situation, what should someone do? Thanks.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Owoyemi. That's a very dicey one. So we'll talk about it in terms of the law, and then we'll talk about it in terms of practical, maybe business sense. So the thing is, if there are some crimes, if the police is coming, it depends on what they are communicating. If they are saying that this person just entered there, we want that person, that's not enough basis, right, for arrest. If they are saying that, oh, this person has committed a crime, we have to get this person, then you want to ask them, then if that crime, you may not be in the best position to know actually. You may just say, okay, please kindly hold on, right? This is best practices. You can ask them, please kindly hold on. Let us confirm from our legal, because we also have a right to protect. And then you then call. When you call, you have to know, because there are some crimes that they can actually arrest without a warrant. And then there are crimes in which that they need a warrant before they can arrest. In any case, because of at that particular time, things might happen very fast, and you may not really know whether or not they have the right to sue to, right? You can just ask them, notwithstanding, okay, where is your warrant? That we have rules or laws that says that we cannot disclose all these things to guest information to any person. So you can just have that chat. In some cases, it works, and then they'll say they'll make abuses and threaten you, and then they'll go back and get the warrant. In other cases, sometimes we've seen things happening, so they might still take the first move. In fact, there was an incident in the US where they tried making a forceful entry, and then the manager in question had to insist. At the end of that, it eventually became a kind of promotion for the hotel, that at the end of the day, this hotel actually protects people's personal data. And, no one is asking you to be a hero, but it depends on your business policy as a brand. What, these are the issues you guys will have to come together and say, this is our policy, no matter what. But in most cases, since they are lawful agents, you can still just, allow them, and always follow up in case your guest needs any support from you to fight their right, or to take over certain actions. You can always support your guests.
Okay, I can see more hands. Stevenson Onyeji should be able to speak now.
Okay, thank you very much. What I want to ask is, in some hotels, is a practice that weekly or monthly of all the guests, Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. Lost you for a bit. If you take it again,
Okay,
please.
so I said, okay, can I go on?
Yes, please.
Okay, in some hotels, is a practice that weekly or monthly, you prepare a sale sheet comprising of the names of all the guests who check in with their passport numbers and all their details, especially foreigners, and you send the Excel sheet and also a copy of their ID to immigration and to police. I want to find out, is this not a breach of the data policy against the guests who check in into hotels?
Okay, thank you, Stevenson. That's a great question. So under the principles and what the regulation provides, right, there are lawful bases to process data, and there are actually 5, right? So as you've mentioned now that it's sent to the immigration, right? So you can be processing that information to comply with a legal obligation as a hotel. If you're required to provide that data, and it is a requirement under the law, or a regulatory authority is requesting, is where you are processing and dealing with that data for that purpose, it is actually covered by the regulation. So just to speak more broadly on this basis, there are 5 bases recognized by the law under which you can process and deal with data. This one we've just established now is a legal obligation. So the law may require you to do certain things with data, and you're meant to do that. But to quickly point out, like we established, transparency is key, and the data subject has a right to be informed. So I believe that your privacy policy must make this information clear, that this is what you are doing based on this requirement under the law, that you'll be sharing the data in that manner. Just to quickly talk on the other basis to process, where you have permission from the data subject, you can deal with their data. Where there is a contract in place, and where you want to protect vital interests. If I had already touched on that, where you're dealing with data to actually protect the interest of that data subject, your guests or those around, for security, or emergency reasons, then there's a public interest basis. Yes, I hope that was clear, Stevenson.
Yes, it is.
Okay. There's a question from Richmond, so you could please, you should be able to unmute now and ask. Agnes, please, if you're able to indicate in the chat also that you wish to speak, then let us know. Which ones, please?
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Kodechi and Ifeanyi. This has been a very enlightening session, and I've learned a lot from this, and I'm very happy that this is coming at this time. I just have a few questions, which I will take quickly, very short questions. I know Ifeanyi talked about not putting cameras in the rooms. Yeah, that is understandable. But in recent times, there has been crimes committed in the rooms. A guest could come in and then receive a visitor, and then the next thing the guest goes out and nobody knows what has happened to the visitor. And a couple of hours or maybe a day later, you find out that, either the visitor has been murdered or something has happened. So what can you do to protect basically, or what should be done? What can the hotels or other people who deal with manage people, other companies who manage people, what can they do to protect visitors that come in to the hotels or even guests, particularly in respect to things that happen within the rooms? And second question that I want to ask is, when a guest puts in his picture on the hotels, using hotels as an example now, on the hotel's map, on Google Map, for example. Sometimes when you go to a hotel and then you're asked to make a review and you review the site of the picture, will it be a breach if the hotel makes use of that picture that is included on their page on Google Maps? The third question would be, in terms of protecting the confidential information of certain guests like celebrities, where a hotel wants to maybe market or have magazines, materials, marketing items, and wish to indicate clients that they work for, corporate and individuals, will it be right if they indicate these people? And if there is room for them to do that, what are they supposed to do, or maybe steps they're supposed to take before they can maybe give that kind of information about their guests or their those who patronize their business? Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Richmond. If I heard all your questions correctly, the first is regarding what should the hotel then do in relation to what goes on in the room, especially where it's not best practices to have cameras inside the room. So
Correct.
usually what happens is that is why there is CCTV camera on the passage and even in at the entrance of the hotel. So when people come in, either visitors or guests to visitors, and one person leaves the room and the person is about to leave, some hotels have a policy in mind, in check, that they would ask you to hold on before you leave and call the room to be sure that that person inside is there, if it's the guest. So they'll call the room to be sure that, oh, your visitor is leaving, we just want to confirm that you are okay and all that. So the guest confirms to say yes. If it is the other way around, where the visitor comes to see the guest and then the guest leaves the room and is going out, the same thing applies. They will then call the room, although some visitors may not find it appropriate, but for security reasons, they will then call the room and the visitors will indicate that yes, all is well and good. So these are some of the practical measures they use, to checkmate what goes on inside the room. Then you asked regarding what should hotels do if they have to use information or reviews from Google Maps. So the reviews itself is public, right? The words that were used. And so they could be some sort of reported under you could use the reviews that are used as a way of reporting what others have to say about the brand. There is no issue of data breach there. The problem is that image. By the time you then take the image, but then it's a matter of semantics, really. By the time you take that image and then you make it an image of the brand, so to speak, in promotion of the brand, then it begins to go beyond what was initially anticipated by the image owner. So the best practice usually, really and truly, is to actually write to the person and say, oh, thank you for this wonderful review. And some people do that. That's why it's always important that hoteliers always check their Google Map account so that they're able to respond in time, right? In real time. So you say, oh, thank you for this review. I hope you don't mind if we use your review for our promotions, or we include the images of this and just to promote our activities. Thank you very much. And usually most persons will be glad that we've seen this in practice. People are usually glad that, oh, you recognize their review and they say, oh, please go ahead. And that is fine. So you then record that as your consent in case tomorrow the person comes up and feels like they should make a gold mine from it. I believe that answers your questions. I don't know if I missed any other one.
Very well,
I
it does.
see also some questions. Sorry, Richmond.
Yes, thank you. You've answered my questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. I see some questions in the chat and QA. I know Prodigy have answered. Someone said, in a case where regulators or police EFCC forcefully enters a guest room without a warrant, can the hotel be at risk of being sued by the guests? So this depends, right? So if the EFCC in the first place has no right to come in, and maybe the crime is such that they need a warrant and they had no warrant, and then they came in, it's very possible that the hotel can be at risk of being sued by the guests, even though the hotel would have a lot of defenses, right? But it's very possible. And at the end of the day, it will come down to, you know, the person would not be accusing the hotel of, you know, maybe assault and all that. The major question the guests would probably be saying is that the hotel failed in their duty to protect, blah, 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 or they acted against, you know, outside the bounds of the law in allowing the AFCC to come and get hold of them. So that's very much possible. That's why it's always good for an hotel to actually engage a DPCO, have a proper internal training in designing their business model, to know how to handle these kind of issues and to know what to allow, because it's not a blanket, even though it's one of the legal principles, like Kodiji mentioned, is legal obligation. It's not blanket. You need to really look at the law and see what powers they're giving to these regulators to do. Are they acting within the bounds or not? So those are the key things there. In the Q&A, there are some questions, Scottish. I don't know if you want to take. I see one said, I don't, but it seems that like we've answered it. It said, in what way can a hotel breach a guest's data?
Okay, so this is quite broad, even in line with everything that we've already spoken about or discussed. You know, non-compliance with any of these requirements already is a data breach. So it's to give instances, not following through with any of the privacy rights of the data subject of the guest is already a breach of the data subject's privacy rights. And that's where those heavy penalties actually come in. So for instance, if you do not have a privacy policy, and we've noted that actually many hotels don't have a privacy policy on their website, but they're collecting information on their websites, that is a breach of the rights of information, right to be informed. So that's something to actually take notice of. And of course, the other rights, which includes right to restrict processing, right of rectification. So where, you are not providing the avenue for guests to correct or, modify the information you have about them, that is also a breach of privacy rights. So non-compliance with any of those rights, established rights, is already a breach, of course, and not complying with the provisions of the law, of the regulation itself as well, also consists of a breach. So you just have to be sure, and that's why we've said it over and over again. You have to engage a DPCO. First of all, it's even a legal requirement that is a DPCO that would file an audit report, which every hotel, because those data subject list, every hotel surpasses that timeline of processing 1,000 data subjects in a year. That's something that, many hotels surpass easily in a month and in times like that. So you're required to conduct an audit. And it's in that process where the DPCO comes in and does that assessment, that things that would be breach of data subject or your guest is identified to ensure that those gaps are plugged in. I know that answers are.
Okay, I think we've come to the end, and the only person outstanding is Agnes. I feel bad that we can't answer her because she's unable to unmute. But Agnes, if you can quickly put it in the chat box, that would be fine. Otherwise, you can just send us an email. I think the screen share still has the email. You can just send us any email at dataprotection@je.africa, and we will get to you. If you want to call, you can also call the number there. and we'll answer your questions. So for those that are privately chatting me, asking for our contact, that is on the screen. You can just send us an email. You want to be compliant, you want to follow the process, just do us an email and then we'll guide you through. Or if there's any other questions you wish to ask. Thank you very much. And thank you all for attending.
Thank you, everyone. Do have a lovely day. Goodbye.